Good morning to everyone that has just joined us, and hello if you are watching the replay. Welcome to another one of our online learning webinars. This time it's all about hidden dampness, how unsuspecting surveyors can be caught out. I'm your host, Andy Ferguson, and joining me this morning, I'm pleased to welcome Neil Marsden, both PCA trainer and owner of Neil Marsden Damp and Timber Consultants. We are about to start the main presentation. Just for those that have just joined us, or if you are watching the replay, if you do want to pose any questions, first place I point you to is to the chat facility on desktop. That will be running up the left and the right hand side. On a mobile, you just need to pull up and the comment bits will be in there. Alternatively, if you do want to email your question, you can just email me directly at andy@property-care.org. That's andy@property-care.org. If you are watching the replay, that is the way to email to basically send in your question. Well, Neil, I can see we're pretty much bang on 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Well, Neil, I'll certainly tell you from my perspective, it seems evident from the audience numbers, both for this webinar and also our previous webinar back in January, Mold and Damp, the Basics. Dampness is clearly still a hot topic, and I suppose for good reason, off the back of the prolonged scrutiny from both media and government over the winter. But Neil, you are long in the tooth here, and you know that sometimes damp problems are not easy to find and detect. But how can unsuspecting surveyors become better at recognizing these hidden damp signs? How can you help us all not be caught out? I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, Neil, and I suppose over to yourself, good sir.
Thank you very much, Andy. Good morning, everybody. Lovely. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. So I was asked to do this webinar by Andy, obviously a few weeks ago, probably maybe a little bit longer, and we discussed the content. And one of the titles that was discussed was how unsuspecting surveyors can be caught out. Now, I'm very aware of the limited time that we have this morning, obviously, to deal with it in the short space of time. It's a subject I could literally talk about for weeks. Or, well, it's exaggeration. I probably could, actually. I probably have in the past. So I'm trying to abbreviate it down and just give some pointers as to what we can do as surveyors to minimize the risk. Obviously, the ultimate risk is that we do something or we give advice and it's incorrect advice, and then it comes back to bite us. You know, the legal profession or hovering around, especially our profession, on the back of developments over the last few months has been a lot of headlines, and it's designed obviously to stir up a bit of hysteria, which it's been very successful in doing. So we just need to be on our toes and make sure when we're doing damp diagnostics or we're investigating damp related problems that we're doing so to the best of our ability, and we don't jump to conclusions. That's pretty much the theme of what I'll be saying today. It's very easy to look at the obvious and then reach a conclusion. But the problem is if we reach the wrong conclusion, then it can come back to bite us quite severely. I am very fortunate, and I have various job roles, but one of the roles that it involves acting as an expert witness. So I have seen that side of it and how quickly things can go wrong. So the idea is just to give some advice where it may give you an indicator or to help keep you out of that situation. So I'm going to hit go on to the next slide. So we're talking about hidden dampness. Somebody is normally flagged up to us that they have a problem with damp that they're concerned about, and they call us in. We are the experts. That's why they call us. And again, I can talk about, are we experts or specialists? When I ask this in a room full of surveyors, which I did last week, and I asked how many experts do we have in the room, and nobody put their hand up. I don't know if it's a British thing where we're frightened, we were a bit embarrassed by it. I would suggest that if you're working as a surveyor, you're going out and doing surveys, that you are an expert, because you wouldn't be there otherwise. People call on you for your expert opinion. But we have to be careful on how we diagnose and how we approach any investigations into damp. So how do we do that? So, we've got to change our mindset. It's very much a case of in the past, and I think, anybody who's been in the business the same as long as I have, or in a considerable period of time, will pretty much agree with me. And to some extent, it's still out there, not among the better companies, but there are companies out there that get their hands on the mystical moisture meter. Like somebody thinks or believes they may have a damp problem, or maybe a pre-purchase situation. They go out with the damp meter, they skirt around the base of the walls above the skirting boards, and they see any evidence of red lights or flashing, or the bells ringing on the moisture meter. And the conclusion is then that you must have rising damp. And this is typical. I see it again. I'm fortunate because I do see a lot of survey reports. The majority of my work is pre-purchase. So somebody's buying a property, they've had a survey carried out. And then in the survey, it states evidence of elevated moisture levels were recorded up to a height of 400 millimeters on the front main elevation, which strongly indicates that the wall is suffering from rising damp. We now recommend you seek further investigations by a damp specialist. Rising damp always seems to get a mention, but it's I'm sure it's well established. Does it exist? Of course it does. Is it as common as we believe? Probably not. So we've got to be careful. There's lots of things will contribute to damp in buildings, and it's up to us as professionals to sift through that and then reach an educated conclusion or an informed conclusion from which we can then advise the clients on how they proceed. So the onus is now very much reliant with this guidance out there, which says to us that we should be carrying out the survey in a holistic manner. Instead of just looking at the specific defect, that we actually now look at the building as a whole, how it reacts. It's we can't just turn up with a meter and start putting it on walls and diagnosing rising damp or diagnosing whatever we believe it to be. So we talk about following the trail and carrying out holistic surveys. So what does that look like, or what does that mean? So before we even do the survey, we need to establish some factors or some details about the property. The age of the property is important because obviously there's different methods of construction. There was things were added to the construction, the regulations as properties were built. So it's very important we understand the age of the property so we get a feel for what type of construction that we're going to be looking at, and potentially what we can't see, what may be under there. The type of construction materials and techniques, is it bricks, stone, solid walls, cavity walls? They play a huge part in what we're looking at. It's also how the building sits in its environment. Is it an exposed location? What is the orientation? If we're looking at mold problems on a wall, we check it on our compass. A lot of the time, especially where I am, it's going to be the north and the east facing elevations. I always teach this from the very beginning whenever I'm working with anybody. I say, the one thing I would say is you get to understand orientation. Where does the sun come up in the morning? It comes up in the east. By midday, it's in the south. And then obviously it's set, when we're sitting on that cliff edge with our loved one with a bit of Barry Manilow on, having a little bit of sway, we're looking west. Now, that might seem very simple. Again, I was with a group earlier in the week, and I asked a question about orientation, and they really didn't understand orientation. But once you establish it, we're trying to use all diagnostic or all information possible to allow us to carry out accurate diagnosis. And orientation is certainly one of the things which is beneficial. If we understand the orientation, we know, that northeast facing elevations are potentially more vulnerable to condensation issues because of the lack of direct sunlight. South facing elevations have particular problems. Southwest, the prevailing wind-driven rain in the UK comes from the southwesterly direction. So if we've got a property which is sitting, the one elevation faces southwest, it's a solid 9-inch wall, there's a good chance that we're going to experience problems with rainwater penetration in that location. So we make a note of any alterations or additions and the potential consequences. So we know what the building is, we can see what the original building consisted of, but have they added an extension? Have they raised the floor levels? Have they breached the original damp-proof course? There's a numerous factors which may come into it. I had a classic about a week ago where they'd added an extension on, and the solid floor in the extension sat approximately 150 mil above the original floor. Now, they suddenly then experienced problems with damp. on a partition wall, and they couldn't understand why. And obviously, by the extension had breached the original damp-proof course, so they now had a problem very much. Well, it was a form of rising damp, but we need to make a note of it. So I did some exposure work, described it to the client. They were there at the time. I showed them exactly what I could see, and it made a lot of sense to them. So I think it's a case of, you know, the days of just turning up and flashing around the place with a meter are long gone. We need to stand back. So we've got our, you know, the list above of information that we need to gather. We have a pre-questionnaire, and we try to gain as much of that information from the client or from the person instructing us before we get there. But when we get there, or when I get there, I will do an external visual inspection. I will have a look at it myself and try to determine what factors may have an influence on how I diagnose the damp in that property. So diagnostic tools, what do we use? I would assume that most surveyors or most people who deal in damp investigations on a regular basis will have you know, a range of diagnostic tools. The electronic moisture meter, it's something which creates great debate. I'm always amazed when I see the social media platforms and you mention the damp meter, and some people, you know, they feel faint, and, you know, you've got to scrape them off the floor. How dare anybody own a damp meter? You know, I realistically, it very much depends on the field that you work in. I can understand that some, you know, well, I've taken myself as an example. A lot of my work is pre-purchase. So I do a pre-purchase survey. The restrictions imposed on that pre-purchase survey are the fact that I can't, you know, it's going to be non-invasive. It's normally established before you get to the property. So I turn up, I can't turn up there and demand that I can remove plaster samples, scrape bits of wallpaper off for diagnostics, and whatever it is that I think is necessary to get a 100% accurate diagnosis. So at the end of the day, there is some degree we're going to have to utilize what we've got and make the best of it. So I never decry anybody for using an electronic moisture meter. Excuse me. But ultimately, you know, I think if you're going to use a meter on a regular basis or use it in damp diagnostics, that you use it effectively or you know, understand how it works. A lot of people don't really understand how the electronic moisture meter works, and that is the big downfall. They start putting figures on diagnostics which are not relevant. We do, a lot of surveyors will carry a digital hygrometer or some form of hygrometer, and that's, you know, it comes in very, very handy when it's used in conjunction with something like an infrared thermometer or a thermal imaging camera. You know, the hot topic at the minute, without a doubt, is condensation and typically mold issues. We understand the reasons why, because of what happened in Rochdale a few weeks ago. But, you know, you've got the media are not going to let this go. The media, especially ITN have obviously, they're going to make a huge thing of this. Anybody who watches the 10:30 news will see there's normally a feature regarding the molding properties and obviously the consequences and everything else. So it is something which is very much a hot topic at this moment in time, and we have to be aware of it. And so if we're going in investigating these problems, we need to do so in a logical and methodical manner. You know, our job as a surveyor a surveyor's inability to interpret the readings is a major problem. I see lots of survey reports on my desk, and the surveyor has commented, you know, elevated moisture meter readings were recorded, readings of in excess of 30% were recorded, and there's the obligatory photograph with the surveyor's arm with a meter against the wall. And I just think you've got to be so careful when you start quoting those figures, because you know, the first question I would ask if I was challenging something in that situation is, was your meter calibrated for that material? And it's a big thing to ask, and invariably most of the time, whatever we're testing, we have not calibrated our meters on that material. Myself and a colleague, Adam Wallace, we were laughing at we picked up on, there was a promotional item on that's out, and so it's out in the internet. And it's a company explaining how their surveyors are extremely professional and everything else. Then there's a photograph of the surveyor standing outside testing the external wall with a damp meter. And, it doesn't really make a lot of sense that we go around testing the external elevations, the external facade with a damp meter, because it's so prone to the elements. So it just, was a promotional item. And we looked at it, Adam flagged it up to me and said, what do you think of this? So we've got to be very, very careful, because people will pick up on whatever we put out there, and they will pick fault with it. So you've got to be careful on how you interpret the readings that you have. We've got all of our equipment, we've all heard the saying, all the gear, no idea. We see it all over the place. But, in our profession is no different. People turn up with the full kit, and then you certainly quickly work out that they don't really understand what they're doing with it. It looks good, but it can be quite dangerous, because people are relying on what we're telling them. If we're explaining to them a problem, and then they take our advice and they proceed with the purchase of that property, or they proceed to carry out whatever remedial work we've recommended, and it doesn't go well for them, they do have a very clear opportunity and to come back and ask, why did you do this? And it depends how you've done the survey. If it's a free survey, you will be facing a negligence claim. And if it's a paid for survey, it will be a breach of contract. But either way, you're going to face a legal action, and the number of cases is on the rise significantly. So we have our basic toolkit. Obviously, that we'll have other ancillary items in our toolkit. So what else do we have available to us? We have two of the best bits of kit we could possibly have, and they came free of charge. And the items I'm referring to are your greatest assets whilst carrying out a survey, are your eyes and your mind. I say, too much reliance on your technology and a lack of thought can have serious repercussions, both financially and emotionally. Why do I say emotionally? Because I've been involved in cases where people have been accused of giving inaccurate diagnosis or inaccurate advice. And normally there's a price to pay financially. That is a small part of it. I always think the bigger damage, we can accept it if there's a financial penalty, somehow we get past that. But it's the emotional damage that actually you will suffer in having to defend that case and try and get through the whole process. So at all costs, you try to avoid it. But we were given a pair of eyes and we were given a brain, and your eyes and your brain are phenomenal tools. We look at mankind, what they've achieved with them. And so when we use our diagnostic tools, I had a very, very interesting one. I had a surveyor came up and spent a day with me a few weeks ago. Well, actually, it was just under the day because you had to get away early. But he turned up with his damp meter. It was fine, lovely, lovely guy. We got on really well. And he just came up for a few hours. We went out on a survey. And he put his meter on the wall, and the meter was, the red lights were flashing, it was hitting maximum. And he said, "Oh, the wall's damp." And I said, "Seriously, do you think so?" Yeah. We can see the meter, I can see it saying here, it's really damp, really damp. And I said, "So what would you recommend?" He said, "Well, I suspect it's rising damp." Why? Because I don't know. He said, "It's just the way the meter is reading, it's telling me this." And I said, "I'll tell you what, why don't we step back a little bit? Just stand, take a few steps back." So we stood back and looked at the wall. I said, "Does that wall look damp to you?" And he's standing looking at it, and he said, "Well, no, there's no obvious evidence of any damp staining." Right, too, or put your hands on that wall and just feel it. Does it feel damp? So I know it sounds super basic, but, I had him put his hands on the wall. He said, "No." I said, "Can you test the skirting board?" So he puts the meter on the skirting board, and we're getting 12% moisture content on the skirting board. Perfectly normal for internal second fix joinery at this time of year, especially skirting boards. So I said, "Now, after doing what you've done, do you believe that wall is damp?" And we stood and looked at it for a couple of minutes. He said, "Well, the meter's saying wet." No, your meter is a machine. That can't think logically. That is just a machine that is programmed to react in certain situations. I said, "Can you honestly recommend to that client that this wall is damp? You now need to carry out a significant amount of invasive remedial work." And once we stood and thought about it, there was a good reason why the wall was testing or giving us high readings, because externally I'd already seen that we had black ash mortar. The property's been constructed with engineering bricks with black ash mortar. which is a pretty good chance there's going to be black ash in the underlying plaster, the render. So the black ash contains carbon, which is a very good conductor of electricity. So when we turned out, that's what we managed to see in an understay cupboard. There was a bit of wall plaster off and we could see the black ash. But, you would have been tempted, or you would have recommended that there was obviously significant invasive remedial work required. So we have to be very, very careful on the false positives that we get on our meter. We can't jump to conclusions because it can come back to bite us in a big way. So I thought I would walk you through, just a short case study. This is a property that I looked at probably about 4 weeks ago. So we often talk about the following the trail. When we do the survey, rather than just rely on the equipment, we actually try to gather, again, as much information as possible from obviously the environment we're in. And then what we do is we follow the trail, follow what's happening. So we talk about it, but how do we do it? In this case is an example of where it can be very, very beneficial. So a very brief outline: the occupier was experiencing severe damp issues on a wall behind her bedhead. You can see the yellow arrow on the left-hand side. So it's indicating the location. The daughter decided to give a bit of a spring clean, so to speak, or we were still probably in winter. I pulled the bed out, and there was a significant mold growth and damp staining on the wall there. You can see it on the right-hand side. A lot of mold around the skirting board level. So obviously they were concerned. They've seen the news. They've heard all about this dreaded mold that's on the go. So they've seen the news. They go. The daughter decides we need to bring somebody in to give some advice. So they've looked up to the local search, and they've identified a damp specialist who they believe is probably a good fit for them. So they invite the damp specialist to come to the property. The damp specialist came out and said, yeah, when you see mold like that, it's very, very typical of condensation. The summary was, it's very typical in properties of this age and type of construction. How many times do we see that written down? So they concluded the cause of the dampness was condensation and recommended the installation of a PIV, positive input ventilation system, the one that goes in the loft space. And, they're very, very good systems. I believe there's a place for everything in the market, and I'm not decrying the PIV in any shape or form. They also noted that there was no fan in the bathroom, which was adjacent to the bedroom. So recommended the installation of a constant trickle and boost fan. Actually good advice if it's going to solve the problem. But obviously they came up with a quote of £1,850 plus VAT. So because it was a significant amount of money, the daughter then spoke to a couple of people and asked for advice. Have you ever heard of these CTB fans or PIVs? And somebody had, however, mentioned my name and just said, they could have mentioned anybody's name, but it was purely just by chance. Said, it may be worth getting a second opinion because you're spending over £2,000 here. So the occupier's daughter decided to seek a second opinion just before they committed to having the PIV and obviously the extraction fan installed. So I've got there, had a big chat with him. How long have you lived in the property? Oh, I've been here, a lot of years. Have you ever had a problem before? No. It's condensation. Have you had condensation? Do you see it on the windows? Have you? I always think speak with the client or speak with the property occupier. They will give you a mine of information which is going to allow you to build a picture. So it was obvious that condensation was an issue. The mold and mildew on the back of the headbed and everything else pretty much were pointed in that direction. So I said, if you can just let, are you happy for me just to potter on and just wander around the property and really get a feel for what's going on? Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, they left me to it. So the one thing which on the photograph you can see there, it looks fairly obvious, but when you walk into the room, it wasn't something that jumped out at you. I've obviously zoomed in there, so it obviously magnifies it. But I noticed that the Conti board at the base of the built-in wardrobe was slightly swollen, as you can see. And, straight away that raises a little bit of a red flag. Why? I mean, sometimes they do split and it might have been an installation fault or whatever. So what I decided to do then, obviously the bed was pulled partially out. So I got, with a damp meter, I decided to scan the carpet in that area. Sounds a bit bizarre, but by doing so, it actually indicated to me that there was a significant moisture content in the carpet. So as a result of that, I said, I'd already asked them, can I roll back carpet? Are you okay with that? I'm a decent carpet fit. I've been doing it for the best part of 40 years, and they were happy for me to do so. They wanted to get to the bottom of the problem. So the carpet, obviously adjacent to the wardrobe, was giving me readings above what I would have expected. I roll the carpet back, and now we can see the mold and mildew on the gripper rods. So there's cause for concern. Now this is at a distance probably around about 800-900 mil from the bed head. So we start to build a picture here. There's something going on. There's something more than just condensation going on. The solid floor is overlaid with thermoplastic tiles, but there you are. I put the moisture meter. I managed to insert it between the tiles, and then the location adjacent to that, the swollen conti board, I'm getting readings of around about 28-30% moisture content. It's obviously more than I would have expected. And then 1.5 meter back from the elevation, the gable elevation, which has got the condensation behind the bed head, I'm getting readings of around about 11%. There was a significant tail off as I moved away from that built-in wardrobe. So that raises concerns, or that points that the problem is somewhere in the region of that built-in wardrobe. So then I decided to do, we've got the equipment in our bag, so why not utilize it? So I decided to get the thermal imaging camera out. While I was doing that, the relative humidity within the bedroom was just under 70%. Now, that's a snapshot. It's a moment in time. I'm in that property. It's a moment in time. It doesn't really tell me anything substantial or significant. But I did I did go into the other rooms. I placed the hygrometer into the different rooms adjacent to that area. And the average relative humidity in the other rooms within the property was 56%. So it tells me that there's something in particular. Why in particular in that bedroom is the moisture content hitting 70%, or the relative humidity, sorry. Again, is it on its own? Does it give me anything meaningful? Probably not. But as an additional piece of evidence, it's a benefit. It gives me something that I can work with to build up a bigger picture. So I get the thermal imaging camera out, and then I decide to just scan the area. Now, on the left-hand photograph, you can see the darker blue area. And you can see some blue staining, some darker staining on the front elevation, which is just above the skirting board. You can see the bright line running through. That is the radiator pipe, the heating pipe. So again, on the right-hand side, I'm looking down, looking over it. You can see the distinctly darker blue areas on the right-hand side of the floor, adjacent to the built-in wardrobe. And it recedes, moving to the left. So again, does it tell me anything substantial? It's just another bit of information, another bit of the jigsaw, which allows me to obviously then start putting this together and working out what the issue is. So we've utilized our damp meter, our thermal imaging camera, we've utilized our hygrometer, probably a thermometer, infrared thermometer. So we've got the tools, so we'll use them, because every one of them just gives us that little bit more information. I then, after gaining that, I went outside, and you can see the garage on the left-hand side to see if there's anything obvious externally. So I go into the garage, and lo and behold, corresponding with that front right-hand corner of the bedroom, there's a load of efflorescent salt below the DPC level. You can see it clearly in the photograph on the right. So there's a significant amount of efflorescent salt, which indicates that water is passing through that structure. So this is just another bit of information. Had I not gone outside and seen it, well, obviously I would never have known about it, but it was very beneficial to see this. It corresponds exactly with the area where I suspect there's an internal plumbing leak. So considering all of the evidence at the time of this survey, my conclusion was that condensation was the result of an internal plumbing leak. The recommendation, the client instructs a heating engineer to investigate and locate the source of the plumbing leak. Now, this is perfectly reasonable. We are surveyors. We go out and do surveys. We are not experts in every aspect of building construction. So it is, we seem to, in the past, we seem to have got into a scenario where we wanted an instant solution. We wanted to give the client an instant solution. But sometimes we can't do that. It sometimes requires further investigation by a specialist in that field. So anyway, long story short, the client's daughter called me 6 days after I'd carried out the survey to inform me that a leak was found on a pipe that was located below the base of the built-in wardrobe. The repair was completed. Obviously, it was identified. The plumber carried out, the heating engineer carried out the repair at a cost of £165, inclusive of VAT. So following the trail, just by gathering the evidence at the time of the survey and trying to piece it together and build a picture of what is normal in this property, what isn't normal, following the trail resulted in an accurate diagnosis, and the homeowner saved themselves over £2,000, minus the cost of a bottle of Singleton whiskey that her daughter asked her to send to me as a thank you, because we'd had a chat. The lady in the property was Scottish. We got on about whiskey, as you would when you're in somebody's property. But we did get on from where she came from. We talked about whiskey, and very kindly she remembered, and she sent me a lovely bottle of whiskey to enjoy. But I'm just delighted that she got the right result. It would have been very, very easy to say it's just condensation and install the CTB fans and etc. So we've seen it before. This, again, a very, very quick case study. It's the easiest way to bring it in. The background of this property, the property consists of a block of residential ground floor flats built in 2022. Now, bear in mind, we're only in 2023 now. So these properties are a year old. Built of cavity blockwork, brickwork, block and beam floor construction, internal walls, dry lined on metal tracking stud framing. All three of the ground floor flats experienced condensation issues at the base of the wall and the skirting boards, with heavy mold growth visible in isolated areas. The first floor flats were not affected, so it was a problem on the ground floor. The extractor fans, so it was Adam. Adam is an associate of mine who's based in Colchester. Adam did the survey. And afterwards, he told me about it. We talked about it while the process was going on. And so Adam turned up, did the survey, and he noted that the extractor fans, the extraction rates were poor, and the undercuts on the door were inadequate. So they were restricting the ventilation and airflow within obviously the flat. So we see the obvious, so we've seen this before. We look at it and we can jump to a conclusion. You need to deal with those undercuts on the doors, and you need to get the extractor fan obviously either serviced or replaced. And it would have been very, very easy to go back to the client and say it's just condensation. What we recommend is we get the doors undercut, we get the fans serviced or replaced. We're dealing with, so what we're looking at is the symptoms, and then we're given a solution. But are we identifying the root cause? Something as surveyors, we've got to be very careful that we do that. There you are. Using so we've tested, Adam's tested the fan, that's his arm, and he's tested the fan. The extraction rates are poor on the mechanical extraction fan. The doors, when they close, are tight to the carpet, so there's no ventilation whatsoever from the doors themselves, from room to room. So these things, we note them because it's important when we're investigating damp that sometimes it may well be that they are purely the cause of the problem. But in this instance, Adam decided or suspected that there was something else going on. He carried out further investigation using a thermal imaging camera and revealed isolated cold spots in several areas. Because of the cold spots, Adam then decided to carry out an inspection of the cavity using a bore scope, and so which was perfectly logical. So we started off with some mold and mildew in the skirting board. We've checked, obviously, the holistic approach. We check all the potential contributing factors in the building, which leads us now, we've got our thermal imaging camera out, that you can see these distinct cold spots. So Adam recommended further investigation. It was outside the scope of his survey, but the initial thoughts were it was probably a problem with cavity wall insulation. So Adam did his bore scope inspection, and lo and behold, that is the condition of the newly installed cavity wall insulation. I mean, anybody, I'm sure you'll all look at it and straight away agree that it's not brilliant. So we've got a problem now, and the problem with this is, Adam, we can do a bore scope inspection. We're limited on what we can do. Can we start breaking, opening up walls and all the rest of it? The chances are we probably can't, and we're not equipped to do that. But it was fair to, following the investigation, it's fair to recommend further investigation, which Adam went back to the client and said, I believe that there's a problem here, and it's almost certainly related to the cavity wall insulation, the inadequate cavity wall insulation installation. That's fine. So, yeah, the client took it on board, and they had contractors go back. Following further investigation, it was confirmed that the insulation was found to have been poorly installed, resulting in reduced surface temperatures, which made them very vulnerable to condensation, and indeed, condensation was occurring in those locations. The outcome was the cavity wall insulation installers agreed to revisit the property and make good the cavity wall insulation. We've seen this lots of times where the cavity wall installers go back and actually put right what they should have done right in the first place. But the benefit is the client has now got a solution. They've got an answer to the problem. We could have just recommended replacing the fan. We could have recommended undercutting the doors. It would not have dealt with the root cause of the problem. And that is why it's when we're on site, we spend a few extra minutes just building a picture and trying to get on top of what's causing it. Not what we can see, but what the cause is. So to summarize it, our role as professional surveyors brings with it responsibilities. We have a duty of care to carry out a survey in a thorough, conscientious and professional manner as befits an average surveyor. That is the acid test. In September 2022, a document was released. This was released while the big launch was at Warwick University. I'm sure some of you will have been there for it. But the document was released. It's a document which was 2 years in the making. There was a lot of negotiations went on behind the scenes, a lot of discussions. You could imagine when you get people into a room from different professions and different organizations. In September 2022, this document was finally produced. And it provides guidance on best practices when investigating moisture and its effects on traditional buildings. It's referred to as the joint position statement. It sets out the framework that we as surveyors are expected to adopt. Now, I would advise anybody who works as a surveyor to get a copy of this. It's relatively easy to get a hold of. I'm sure we can do it via the PCA, or if you're RICS, I'm sure you've already had a copy emailed to you or sent to you. But I would familiarize yourself with that document because it gives some very, very good guidance. I'm long in the tooth. I'm old. I've seen lots of documents produced, and sometimes I'm a bit puzzled by them and what the thought behind them. But this is actually a really well thought out document, and it gives us a protocol now when investigating damp issues. One of the things that it does talk about, it sets out clearly the protocol for investigating damp, but we provide a holistic diagnosis that identifies and deals with the causes rather than focusing on the symptoms. I think one of the problems we've had or we've done for many, many years, lots of years, is that we see the problem and we want to then deal with it. We want a solution. Sometimes we're not going to get that in one visit. We turn up to do a survey, and we aren't magicians. We don't have mystical powers. We sometimes, I've gone back to properties 2-3 times because it's really difficult to pinpoint that. Sometimes it's difficult to pinpoint it, but we explain that to the client. We don't feel pressured into just coming up with an instant solution. This is what you need to do. We understand that dealing with dampness is often a staged process. Recognize how to deal with the obvious first, and there's no shame in that. If I can work out what the predominant source of damp. I see this typically when we have penetrating damp, rainwater penetrating the building fabric. So we've got a penetrating damp issue, and I pointed out, I believe that this is a penetrating damp issue. The external render needs to be, made watertight, or the gable needs repointed or whatever. I'll recommend what I think is appropriate. And I will put a caveat in there and say, obviously that is the predominant source of damp as it stands at the time of my visit is rainwater penetration. It is feasible that it is masking an underlying damp issue. such as rising damp or some other form of damp. There's, I don't see saying any shame in that whatsoever. So my recommendation is, deal with the penetrating damp, and then we monitor it. So how about we do that, and then we monitor it over the coming months and see if there's been any improvement. I had exactly this scenario with a property in Northumberland, and I believed that the problem was penetrating damp. It was it was an exposed location, everything else. The lady who owned the property actually had a stonemason look at the property as well, and they had a slightly different opinion to mine, and they were wanting to repoint the building and do various other works. And I said to the client, why don't we just deal with the what we can see the immediate cause of the problem? And so we negotiated on it. I spoke with the stonemason, and we agreed on a monitoring process. He's going to carry out a limited amount of work, and then we'll see where it goes. It may well be that we get a result with it, and if we do, happy days. If we don't, then we go back to the client and say, look, we're now going to have to look at doing something slightly different. And it's this pressure to come up with these instant answers. That's the problem. So we've got to be able to identify where further focused investigations may be needed. We may need to take plaster samples. We may need to take, whatever it is, invasive investigations. But we have to have permission to do that. It's very easy if it's the owner-occupier, but if it's in a pre-purchase situation, it becomes very, very difficult. But I would recommend that you familiarize yourself with the documents, because it actually lays out a protocol, and ultimately it will be a protocol that will be, or you will be judged against if it's found that you have been out and you've carried out a survey. There are various documents that will be used to establish the standard at which you should have performed your job. And this is one of the documents in the future that will be used. It's very user friendly. It's not a hugely difficult document to read. It's relatively short, but congratulations. And I applaud the people who got together and put this together, because it's actually a really informative, useful document, not just for surveyors starting out in their career, but for people who've been doing this for a long time. I actually found it incredibly useful. So I would recommend that you have a look at it. Obtain a copy of it, familiarize yourself with it. It gives you the guidance that ultimately should be beneficial. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very conscious of the time. I think we're pretty much hitting the ground or hitting it at the right time. So I hope it makes sense. I've summarized there. I'm passionate about it because, I'm not one of these who goes out and bashes surveyors or condemns surveyors. I say to any group, and I'm sure there are people on here who I've worked with, and there's some people who I've worked with very recently. And I've said it when I've stood in front of groups of whoever I'm training, surveyors or whatever. I am no cleverer than anybody else. I'm no cleverer than anybody else who's in attendance today. I'm a bit older probably than some of you, and I've had a little bit more experience. But I often think damp diagnostics, there is no hard and fast way we do it. We're human beings. Everybody sees things differently. You will look at something and see it differently to the way I will see it. But ultimately, my experience is we'll work through the process, and we'll normally come up with the same solution or diagnose the same problem. So because you did it differently to me does not make you any better or any worse than me. It just means we see things differently, which is very, very healthy. But, I would encourage you, it'll come up, on the end of this, there are some further documents if you need guidance on diagnostics, how you go about your diagnostics, and it's how you relay the information to your client. We can be the best surveyor in the world, but if we can't communicate our findings to the client, we're going to find ourselves on a very sticky wicket. So I hope it's been useful and it gives you an indication. Follow the trail, ask the questions, speak to the homeowner, get the information. Everything just comes together in a picture, and now we can make an informed decision. And I would just like to say thank you very much for listening, and I will hand you back to Andy.
Well, hello, Neil. Well, firstly, a big thank you for that. Well, big thank you for that great presentation. I know I certainly took quite a lot from it, and I certainly know that the audience have taken quite a lot from it. But I am conscious of of time, and there's quite a few questions that have come in now. Folks, I will say, if you do want to pose a question to Neil, then now is the time. I will try and get it in. All you simply need to do is just chuck it into the chat and I can pretty much hoover it up. Neil, I will tell you that the bulk of the questions that are actually coming in have actually stemmed around about the diagnostic tools, but I'm going to stay away from that just for the first one. Abdul Salam has emailed in, and his question is: has the recent media spotlight on damp and mold made the job of diagnosing dampness a more serious issue with I can't even say the words for some moment. Yeah, clearly not enough coffee. But on top of that, with rising utility costs, is this something that's impacting the issue even further? So I've got a 2-point question there.
It's honestly, yes, it's a great question. And the answer to the first bit is yes. You know, what it's done, we had 2 cases which pretty much raised the public profile of our industry. Obviously, the Rochdale one was a huge one because of the coroner's verdict that mold was a significant contributing factor in the death of the young boy. But what it's done, you know, it has raised the profile, and yes, it has really shone an emphasis on how we perform as surveyors. It's a hot topic. It isn't going to go away. The second part of your question ties in exactly with it. We're in a cost of living crisis. We're in a fuel crisis. And a lot of people, I'm sure all surveyors will see exactly the same as me. We're seeing condensation as a huge issue, but especially when people are terrified to put the heating on or balance the heating and ventilation correctly. So there's no magic solution to that. We find people, you know, I'm going to properties and they're just not heating the properties. I understand it. I can afford it, but my wife is constantly talking to me about our fuel bills. We're paying £450 a month. That's £5,000 a year for our fuel bill. And she keeps blaming, I don't know if she's telling me off or blaming me. It sounds like it when she talks to me. You know, do you know how much our bill is? I'm like, yes, I do. Can I change it? I'll speak to the government, see if they can change it for me. But I feel as though I'm getting wrong. But so it's one of these, it isn't going to go away. This is with us, you know, the high inflation, the interest rates. So yeah, this is why we're seeing much more of it now, and it's going to become a big issue. And it's very important then that we try to keep up to date with the best diagnostics or do the best job we can when we're at the property, rather than just second guess what's going on.
Do you know, Wayne Goddard has just made a comment, and funny enough, it was someone else made a comment on this earlier on in the presentation. I don't think it was Wayne, but just tagging on from that question, do you feel that overcrowding has actually been a contributing factor here?
The trouble is, you know, we live in a world where we've got to be very, very careful what we say.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
So if you're asking me, do I believe? Because I will say, in my opinion, overcrowding is a contributing factor. But then people will then shoot me down and say, you can't say that. It's the buildings at fault. And I get it. It's a combination of both. You know, anybody who's worked as a surveyor, we see things in life that a lot of people won't see. I always say that's what makes our job fascinating. We see all aspects of life. And so it's very, very easy to say, you know, we can see what a contributing factor is, but unfortunately, the fact of life is we sometimes can't see it. You know, so we've got to kind of tickle around the sides. Whereas I always say the thing, most condensation issues, especially the mold related issues, it's a combination of the homeowner. If it's a tenanted property, that's the hot topic. The tenant and the landlord working together constructively, and then come up with, you know, and you'll normally find the solution. But you know, it's already saying to the landlord, you need to do this, and this. But then there's no you know, willpower to do or will to do anything on the tenant side. So whatever the landlord spends the money on, likewise, I see tenants who have done an incredible job trying to control the problem, but they're not getting the help of the landlord. So until we have some kind of process, brings it together, you know, and we all understand what we're trying to achieve, we'll not get there. We are getting better at it, but there's still a lot of work to go.
Yes, well, here I've just had an interesting question that's come in by a chap whose name is Lawrence. Lawrence, name's so good you've got to say it twice. But just before I go on to talking about the tools, because this is where the bulk of the questions are coming in about the diagnostics tools, he's raised an interesting point about the joint position statement, the one from the RICS, Historic Scotland, and from the PCA Property Care Association. Now, his question is this: the RICS Home Survey Standard recommends that the surveyor limits recommendations for further investigations for damp issues, but the RICS surveyor inspection must be non-invasive. Is this a confliction, a contradiction that isn't adequately covered in the joint position statement?
I have to say yes, because it's easy to say. I know that there is, and I've seen it myself. I'm in a lot of surveying forums. A lot of my colleagues, a lot of the people who are in there will be here today, and so I absolutely agree. And and I see people are very reluctant to recommend further investigations. So, and I understand that. If you're a professional surveyor, but
absolutely,
especially in pre-purchase surveys, the restrictions are very onerous, and sometimes it's a case of you're at the property. I feel to a degree with a lot of the RIC surveyors, because the pressures, they're under time frames, and because of the scale. I'm very fortunate. I do a damp survey. I'm looking at the damp issues. Surveyors going out there doing a building survey. They're looking at every aspect of that building. Realistically, to do it, how long do you need? You need a lot longer than they're probably getting allowed for in the diary. So I can understand why they will then recommend further investigation, because they may not have the time, or just whatever their insurance is, the PI and everything else may not allow them to do so. So it is something that probably, it's easy to say one thing, but then in the practicalities in the real world, it maybe conflicts with what we're trying to say. So I do understand why a lot of surveyors recommend further investigation. I do a damp survey. On average, I'm going to be in that property around about 3 hours. In that 3 hours, most surveyors have got to do the full building survey, whatever survey they're booked to do. So they're at a huge disadvantage. So I can see why they do that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go on to the bulk of the questions now. I will say this to everyone that's posed the questions, both via email and chat. I'm going to try and summarize your questions, because there's a lot of questions that are kind of fairly similar. But again, I suppose the big question that has been coming up has been on things that you can recommend. Now, is there any particular brands of diagnostic tools that you would recommend over others? Now, looking at it maybe from the point of view of budget to top ends, what's good, what to start starting off. Is there any particular thoughts from your perspective?
Can I summarize that? Yeah. There is this high end, there's low end, there's budget. Yeah. My advice is do not go out and feel as though you've got to spend an absolute fortune. I learned a lesson very early in life, and it relates to nothing we're talking about today, but it's squash. I used to play squash at a decent level, but my brother played squash at a much higher level, and he had a racket which was obviously the top racket in the sport. I decided I wanted one, and he said to me, "It's not worth buying it because you're not good enough to get the full benefit of this racket." And he played at international level, and I learned that, and I realized I could go and spend 500 quid on a squash racket. I could buy one for £50 and and it would do what I'm capable of. So James Berry, the technical manager at the PCA, did a test a video on electronic damp meters, and he just to see how good or bad they were, how they performed. My advice is do not spend a fortune. I know people do. Ultimately, the meter is very, very limited. It's a tool that you can use to
Neil, sorry, we're struggling to hear you. There's someone speaking in the background. It's Can you? Is there someone? Is there someone in your room in the background there?
In my room?
Yes.
No, I've never moved. Nobody's come in.
Oh, is it? Or there's a voice coming over the. There's a voice coming over the webinar.
Is it still there?
Yes, but sorry, carry on. It might just be me. My apologies, folks, for disrupting.
No problem.
Yeah.
So my advice is, you could go out and spend £1,500, £2,000 on a damp meter. You could go out and spend £30 on a damp meter. Ultimately, they're pretty much both going to do the same thing. They will point you in the direction of where you now need to investigate further. So, there's lots of brands. I've used Protometer for a lot of years, but there are lots of brands out there that will do equally as well the job. I would say don't overestimate or don't overpay for the equipment, because I know some people will spend £30,000 on a thermal imaging camera, and I've used the FLIR one as the one that I use typically, and that's around about £300, £400, and it's more than suffice for what I need to do. I'm not good enough. I'm not a good enough thermographer to use a £30,000 piece of equipment. I would have spent a lot of money without getting the full benefit of it. So just don't be persuaded into spending the huge money unless you're really confident that you're going to get the maximum out of that investment. That's my advice.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad you mentioned about the PCA test wall. Folks, there is a video that I've just shoved up into the chat there where PCA's James Berry, as Neil said, he goes and tests a lot of the different equipment, and he kind of summarises his opinion there. So check it out. And Neil, I do apologise. I just realised what that voice was when I was trying to Google for the PCA test fault. It's named it through the YouTube video automatically played.
Started to play.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a faux pas from me. Just sticking, and I'm only going to ask maybe one or two more questions here because we're running out of time here, but just because a lot of the questions have come about the diagnostic tools, sticking with those tools, and if I focus particularly on the animators, Graham McCall's asking, what would you consider to be a sufficient or good level of extraction determined by an animator?
Sorry, what would be?
A good level of extraction. Is that the wrong term? Is he maybe?
No, it depends very much on what you're looking at. The extraction rates for a fan in a kitchen will vary. If the extraction fan is located close to the hob, it's a lesser extraction rate is required. If it's at a distance of so many meters from the hob, it's a greater extraction rate required. Bathroom fans require a varying extraction rate. So there is I couldn't say it, you put it on a fan. If you're getting 30 litres a second, it's adequate, because it may not be, depending on the location of the fan. The document to look at for guidance is the approved document Part F of the building regulations. So if you get a hold of a copy of that, you find that, I would imagine, on the PCA website. I'm sure there's a copy of it on there. So if you go onto the PCA website and in the library, have a look, and you'll find approved document Part F. It gives the guidance on the extraction rates required for specific fans in specific locations. So I can't say, you need to be pulling 25 litres a second or 15 litres a second. It varies. And there's circumstances where it's actually approved document Part F is a very, very good document. So unfortunately, a lot of house builders don't really take any notice of it. It's something that isn't implemented massively, but as for ourselves as surveyors, it's a really useful guideline on how on what we can use. Cool.
Well, last question I'm going to ask. There is a few other questions. I'll pass them over to you, Neil. If you can answer them, then great. But last question I'm going to summarise, which is 4 questions in one, really. And it's principally to do with protometers. So, and also thermometers. So first part is, how often do surveyors use thermometers on site, and should we be using them more often? Second part is, would you recommend with protometers using pinless or pin methods?
Both.
Both. Why both for the second part?
Both. I couldn't use it because what I'll find is I put on scan mode. I always use scan mode first because it's the least invasive. You know, the big fashion in people's properties now is painted walls as opposed to wallpaper. When it was wallpaper, you could get away with it. Painted walls, 2 pinholes, very, very visible. So I'll scan the walls. And sometimes I get elevated readings on the meter off the scan mode. What I will do then is test it on pin mode to see if I'm getting the same reading. Because if you've got contaminants such as black ash in the render coat itself, it's a high carbon content, it's going to scream at you and say it's damp. But then you put it on pin mode, you're going to get a significantly reduced, probably normal reading. So I always use both. I don't use one or the other. I find it difficult to understand how people can do a reasonable survey or a reasonable scan of a property on pin mode, because the restrictions are you can't put those pinholes in people's walls. So one thing I would recommend is a meter with both scan and pin facility. It's very, very useful. You go around, if you scan all of the walls on scan mode and you're getting absolutely nothing, great, we're happy. But then when you're doing a timber inspection, you've got your pin mode, you can stick the pins into the timber. That's what they're calibrated for. Word of advice, if you've got an electronic moisture meter, make sure that you calibrate it on a regular basis. Because in the event of a legal challenge, the first thing somebody will challenge is when was the last time you calibrated your electronic moisture meter? And if you haven't got a record of when it was last calibrated, you're going to be on a sticky wicket. Very, very easy. Most of them come with a calibration kit. You just touch it against the pins and it'll tell you where you should be registering. But it's just a little tip. It just came to mind there.
No, absolutely. And just on the thermal imaging camera, do you think we should be using these more often?
I love my thermal imaging camera. To be fair, I was one of those people who went out and spent quite a bit of money on thermal imaging cameras. And I've got my colleague Adam Wallace to thank. He went out and bought the FLIR one, which is the one that attaches to your mobile phone.
Someone's just commented on that. Andrew Breyer's like he's got it for his phone.
Oh, honestly, Adam went out and bought one. He was desperate to get one, so he bought it. And he sent me some photographs, some images with it. And the following day, I ordered one. And since I've ordered it, I've had it a few weeks now. It's what I use. I'll use my thermal imaging camera virtually every day because it's so convenient. But the FLIR one, I've just seen some of the comments there saying exactly the same. It's very, very easy to use. You know, the beauty is you're looking at it through your camera, your phone. And if you want to save an image, you just take a photograph and it just goes to your gallery. It's a brilliant bit of kit. Have a look at the FLIR one. Around about £350-ish, but it'll go with iOS and what's the other one I've got? Android. Yeah. Very, very good bit of kit. And as a starter, I think that's an ideal tool to go with.
Perfect. Well, there you go, Mark Stevens. I think that answers your question that's on the chat there as well. And I think several others. Out with the FLIR one, because that's the phone one, just to help Mark and others as well. What's the other thermal imaging camera? Is it the FLIR C5 you've got?
Oh, that I've got. No, it is. I'm sure I've got it in my tool bag. I'd have to go and have a look and tell you the model number. But
that's all right. That's all right.
I paid £1,300 for it. Yeah, thinking I need a thermal imaging camera. I went out and spent £1,300 on one, and the £300 model is much better. Much better.
Wow. Well, there you go, folks. There you go. Well, here, folks, just to kind of wrap up, for those that might be looking for additional information, there are some sources up there that you can kind of go to. Our professional pages have a wealth of information. Just go under to the professional section, just go to the help and guidance section, and you'll find everything kind of broken down by subject there. And there's a wealth of additional supporting pages for each section. There are, for those that really want to get technical, our technical document library is also available as well. I'm going to share the links to this in a wee second. We also have a stack load of previous dampness related CPD videos that you can look at as well. Again, it's just via the professional section. And this particular webinar will be available shortly as well, that you can rewatch yourself or pass on to your colleagues. Now, I've just sent some links to some of these resources there. Now, if you are interested and you do really want to learn even more, there are available training courses. If you so desire, you could go on to one specifically for our surveyors, one specifically for our technicians, and there is a whole host of other additional dampness related training courses which I've not listed on here, but if you are interested, then certainly go to our training and qualifications section of the website. Just before I go, I just want to make a mention to the 2023 International Property Care Conference on the 21st of September. We are currently in the process of developing the programme here, but while we are waiting to release that, there are early bird offers available. If you are a PCA member, it is a tiny sum of £150. Non-members, again, even a tiny sum of just £210. For that, you're going to get a whole day of CPD, networking, and even a lunch thrown in. It is a great day. Anyone that's been to our conferences will be able to tell that. But if you do want some insights into terms of what the conference looks like, and also as well links to the one coming up, I've just shared that on our chat just there, and these will also be in the show notes for anyone watching the replay. So just before we go, just a shout out to our upcoming webinar on the 27th of April. This time we take a look at the brand new published guidance on sprayed foam insulation inspections. How does this help property professionals? This is ideal if you are a property professional, a residential surveyor, or a damp and timber specialist. We hope you will join us on the 27th of April. And if you are interested, I'm just about to share the link to where you can actually just find that and kind of register. Again, for those watching the replay, this will be in the show notes, but also as well for anyone that may want to actually look at the brand new guidance. I've also just kind of shared that via the chat as well. And again, I will make sure I put this in the show notes for anyone that wants to see it. So lastly, but not least, I just want to say firstly to yourself, Neil, a big thank you for that presentation. I think not only myself, but everyone else agreed, extremely insightful. I want to say also a big thank you to everyone that joined us this morning. And last but not least, I just want to say hopefully you have a lovely rest of the day, and we see you at the next webinar on the 27th of April.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thanks a lot. Fantastic. Thank you.